My name is Dmitry Yakushkin. I'm the executive director of the newly established Center for Conflict Resolution here at the Faculty of Social Sciences at the Tel Aviv University. And it's an honor for me and my colleague, Max Goetz, who's our researcher inside the center, to welcome you all, to welcome you who are here present, and to welcome all the people who are online listening to us and who will join us either as participants in the discussion or speakers. I think we have a very exciting panel today, and I hope that we will have a fruitful discussion during the day, during our three panels. We chose. It's not randomly. We chose. When we discussed with Max what kind of subject to choose for the first opening conference. We debated several questions, and finally we finalized it. We chose to talk about transformative justice. Transformative justice as a topic which has been developing in the last decades, which became which became very popular at the end. Entered the, let's say, the stage of public debate at the end of the previous century, and is ongoing today, and it has many repercussions and many sides to it. And we tried today, when finalizing our agenda, the program today, we tried to cover, let's say, the different sides of this topic. I remember I used to work in a newspaper in the late 90s. Yes, in the late 80s, beginning of the 90s. Yes, absolutely. And I remember this was a Russian newspaper, very popular democratic newspaper, which pushed reforms in the Soviet Union. And I remember how we looked upon and how we discussed Sam Fukuyama's famous article where he said that history, since the, let's say, the liberal democracy had won and the Soviet Union has collapsed, history has stopped. There's no way to go. Everything is decided. He didn't even mention possible ecological problems, which absolutely were obvious. But we were overwhelmed by this view. Of course, it sounded, revolutionary. And I know that today Sam Fukuyama regrets his statement at that time. He says that, of course, he was wrong. And we all, as people who study and research and follow the events, we see how wrong he was. So in the past 20 years, we see an avalanche of conflicts. We see an avalanche of conflicts, and conflicts which sometimes make you think that, in a way, the world is returning to medieval times. It's not just countries fighting against each other. It's like, ancient feudals linked in their castles with their people, fighting against each other for resources, for territory, in the name of religion, in the name of sometimes unknown entities. But and that's why that brings us to the second, let's say, part of our topic: negotiations. I mean, evidently, this is a needy thing, very difficult, very challenging, but it's a step. And that's why also we chose this topic as the first, because in a certain way, in a moral way, it's not only a vast area of research where you can talk a lot and contribute, but it's also kind of a thing which makes you optimistic, because at the end of the day, there's no way left but somehow to negotiate, to bring people together, to sit at one table, to express views, that if we're going to talk today about, let's say, political apologies, that in each religion, repentance is a very important notion, right? So even if it's hard, you have to start. So with these opening words, I would like to pass the word to Itai Sened, the Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, and I would like to say that Itai was at the origin of the creation of this whole center. He gave us the green light, and we hope that we will fulfill, let's say, our program in the coming months and the years, hopefully. And let's start. Thank you, Itai.
First of all, I'd like to apologize for both the Vice President for International Affairs and the Vice Provost. It started with a Vice President who was supposed to open this important meeting, but she was called on an urgent mission to the United States having to do with a lot of issues we are having there. And then Vice Provost was volunteered to replace her, but he was called, he couldn't make good on his promise because his schedule got filled up with, he's an expert, those of you who don't know, I'll just say he's one of the top experts in Israel and the Northern Front, and since the Northern Front is becoming the epicenter of the current conflict, he was called to a series of meetings and couldn't come. So this brings me to my comments. We, as Dmitry mentioned, you know, you all recall Fukuyama. I was around the same time, a PhD student at the University of Rochester. John Mueller, one of the top experts in international relations, wrote a very similar book with a very similar conclusion. It made a lot of noise in the American academic world, not so much worldwide. And he was just as wrong as Fukuyama, but I want to, I don't particularly appreciate spending too much time thinking about the past, but more about the future. And it seems that Dmitry's point about going back to medieval times is a critical point to keep in mind when we have these kind of meetings. I grew up in the region that was attacked on the 7th of October. And I grew up there in relatively quiet times. But I've, of course, become very sensitive to everything that is going on there and have noticed that there too we are going back to medieval times. Everybody thought that the defense system that is supposed to defend these villages, a very complicated high-tech structure, is unpenetrable. And it turns out that the only thing that stopped the invaders were guns that I recall training with when I was 15. And right now, when they try to help these villages, that's what they equip them with, just simple guns. And I think that we are facing a similar problem in our academic world, in that we have gone fast forward to use very sophisticated theoretical structures to deal with conflict. And I think we have gone too far away from basics. And as Dmitry mentioned correctly, we're going back now to basic things we never thought we'd go back to, such as primordial religious, tribal affiliations, a big topic that currently preoccupies me as kind of my next topic of research. I studied all my life very sophisticated sophisticated mathematical models of parliamentary systems, liberal democracy systems. And it seems that we are going back right now, at least in my world, to study basic structures of city management. And I'm having this ongoing discussion with some economic historians who specializes, at least in particular, one of them, Professor Graf, who she she keeps lecturing me on how the basic city structure of Florence has survived much better than all of the parliamentary structures that I've been studying in the last 20 or 30 years. So we are, I think, in a huge kind of backward delay in that we have moved too fast, too far forward, and we, I think, are failing at understanding some of the most basic aspects of conflict and how they may or may not be resolved. And side by side to the technological advances that we see ongoing, we see our inability to deal, our total inability to deal with current conflicts. When Dmitry and Chaim came to me with this idea about the center, as Dmitry knows, I was in the midst of talking with some of the top leaders that actually are greatly and deeply engaged in these discussions, to mention just three famous ones, Shlomo Ben-Ami, Tzipi Livni, and Itamar Rabinovich. For the sake of perfect disclosure, all three of them are friends. And they talked to me about going to these meetings where the top negotiators, speaking of negotiation, Dmitry, and they all describe the same basic event. It usually happens in the most sumptuous 5+ star hotels. The top leaders of the world arrive there, or former leaders of the world arrive there. They talk for 2 days, pretty much admitting the complete inability and non-consequential debates. Non-consequential in the simple sense that they serve nothing. And then they go back home. So we have here an ongoing, long-lived, excellent program in conflict resolution. But it is a program that is mostly geared toward a master degree, an international master degree, and an Israeli and Hebrew master degree. Fortunately for us, we were able 2 or 3 years ago to move on to the PhD degree. So we now grant PhD degrees. Max is one of the 3 or 4 first PhD students who are now being trained in the program. But it is a very important program, and it is ongoing, and it has some excellent researchers like Nimrod and Boaz, who are with us, Nahumi and others who are engaged with it. And we thought that this center would serve as kind of the research body of the educational programs that is mostly, as I said, master's degree for PhD students and growing, because if you count all of those who are just starting, you get to significantly larger numbers of PhD interested or beginning the education with the program. So I'm happy that we are finally getting to this stage where we have this event, a very important event with significant scholars that came here from all over the world. Looking forward to participate in as much as I can. Unfortunately, I'm also the dean, and I also teach today. So I will only be able to stay for a short while. But this is all recorded, so I'll be able to look at it later. I really hope that we meet again in happier times. This is a difficult time because part of the challenge that's a program and the center is facing. It's impossible to get anything done in such a stressful situation where everybody is fighting everybody. And it's very hard to bring international scholars to Israel right now for a lot of reasons, but for nothing else, there aren't any available flights from a lot of different places coming here. And not too many people are willing to come. So it is a challenging time, but I do hope that this center overcomes this challenge and become a steady partner to our effort in better understanding conflicts and their resolutions, and training our students, masters and PhD. So thank you all for coming. Looking forward for the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Itai. Okay, so Max, let's start with the first panel. Max will be the host of our first panel.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first panel of our first conference of the Center of the Studies of Conflicts and Their Resolution. And I'm very pleased to welcome you all here. The first panel is on the name of Leadership in Processes of Reconciliation. How influential is individual leverage in negotiations on normalization and reconciliation? We had planned to have 4 speakers. Unfortunately, I just got the message that Cornelia is not joining us online today because she got sick. So we will be 3. First, Sabine von Oppeln, a professor emeritus from the Free University, will speak online. She will speak on the French-German reconciliation under Adenauer and de Gaulle. Then Professor Roni Stauber from Tel Aviv University will talk on Germany and Israel, on Adenauer and Ben Gurion. And finally, Lehrs, Dr. Lehrs will talk about private peace entrepreneurs and non-state actors in peace processes. Thank you, and I think in order to have some time to speak about the presentations and to have a discussion, we can just start. So, Susanne, can you hear me? You can talk with us and start now.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. My name is Sabine von Oppeln, and thank you very much. I would like, first of all, to thank you for inviting me to this interesting conference, and I congratulate you for the funding of this institute. It seems me to be very interesting. In my research and teaching activities, I dealt with Franco-German relations, comparative politics in the perspective of France and Germany, and European politics.
Sabine?
Today, my contribution will focus on the process of reconciliation between France and the Federal Republic of Germany under de Gaulle and Konrad Adenauer. To this day, the cooperation between France and Germany is regarded as a successful example of interstate reconciliation. In the first part, I will briefly outline the activities of de Gaulle and Adenauer. After that, I would like to discuss the explaining factors for their success. To conclude, I will present some reflections on what we can learn from the activities of Adenauer and de Gaulle. Now I turn to my first part, the activities of the 2 statesmen. After the experience by Germany during the 19th and 20th centuries, it is nearly a miracle that both countries turned the so-called hereditary enmity into a new phase of reconciliation, friendship, and finally cooperation. De Gaulle and Adenauer are the dream team of this process. In September 1958, Adenauer was the first and also the only foreign statesman to be invited to de Gaulle's private residence in Colombey-les-Deux-Églises. This was the beginning of friendship and mutual respect. One of the highlights of their activities was Adenauer's first official visit to France in July 1962. The symbolic major events of this trip were the first joint parade of German and French soldiers on a military training ground in France, and the embrace of the two statesmen during a solemn service in Rheims Cathedral, you see it on the slide, which had been destroyed by the Germans during the First World War. 2 months later, in September 1962, de Gaulle's triumphal procession through the Federal Republic was crowned by his visit to Ludwigsburg in southwest Germany, where he delivered his unforgettable speech to the German youth in German language at Ludwigsburg Castle. Many veterans still rave about this event until today. A key sentence of this speech was, "I congratulate all of you. I first congratulate you for being young," and a few sentences later, "I further congratulate for being young Germans, which means children of a great people." 70 years after the end of the war, and 1 year after the construction of the Berlin Wall and the Iron Curtain in Europe, these sentences were balm for the soul of many Germans. These activities were crowned in January 1963 with the signing of the Élysée Treaty, presented as a friendship treaty. This treaty laid the foundation for the development of a comprehensive cooperation network, both at the state level and in the framework of civil society. In the course of time, this network of relations was continuously expanded. This created the institutional basis for the special relationship between the two countries, which scholars have described as embedded bilateralism. The several elements of this embedded bilateralism you can also see on the slide. In addition, the treaty set up the basis for intensive cultural exchanges between the two societies. The most important institution was the Franco-German Youth Office, which has until those days enabled more than 9 million people, especially young people, to which has until those days enabled more than 9 million people, especially young people, to participate in over 382,000 exchange programs since its founding in 1963 until today. The activities of the Youth Office were complemented by the institutionalization of student exchanges and by the creation of bilateral study programs. Last but not least, a large number of town twinnings and partnerships between French departments and regions with German districts and local states contribute to the development of civic ties. Beyond the institutionalization of regular intergovernmental consultation and the widely developed economic ties, the comprehensive relations between the two societies represent a firm and viable basis for Franco-German bilateralism, even in times of crisis and political misunderstanding. The Élysée Treaty was finally supplemented by the Aachen Treaty in 2019 at the suggestion of the current French President Emmanuel Macron. In addition to the intergovernmental consultation mechanisms, the Aachen Treaty has created a framework for further deepening cooperation at the European and regional levels, as well as between the civil societies. However, recent studies indicate that the treaty not only has numerous gaps, but also that the opportunities it offers to deepen Franco-German cooperation have not yet been utilized. It is rightly pointed out that a treaty under international law can only provide the framework conditions for successful cooperation, but that it is ultimately the political actors who have to bring the treaties to life. Now I pass for the second part of my presentation, the factors of success. In search of factors explaining the success of reconciliation under de Gaulle and Adenauer, first and foremost, the international framework conditions and the interest of the both statesmen must be mentioned. After World War II, the struggle for zones of influence, the formation of blocs, and the fear of the Soviet Union increased the pressure for cooperation among Western European states, which was unthinkable without a reconciliation between Germany and France. Conversely, European cooperation provided a framework for resolving bilateral conflicts, which was particularly evident in the 50s in the resolution of the disputes over the Saarland, as well as the conflicts over coal mining and steel production. From this time until today, Franco-German cooperation and the success of European integration are mutually dependent. Moreover, the division of Germany in the context of the bloc formation made it easier for the French side to overcome its fears of the larger weight of a German unitary state in the center of Europe, to take the path of cooperation and control of Germany in the context of the West European unification, and last but not least, to realize the French claim for a leading role in European politics. Adenauer and de Gaulle acted at the beginning of the 60s under the impression of the renewed escalation of the East-West conflict with the Berlin crisis, initiated by the Khrushchev Ultimatum in 1958, the construction of the Berlin Wall 1961, and the Cuban Missile Crisis 1962. The three scenarios intensified once again, but at the same time initiated a turning point in the relationship between the superpowers with the recognition of the zones of influence and the introduction of the policy of détente. In addition, the change in US nuclear strategy from a strategy of massive retaliation to a strategy of flexible response, the US insistence on an increased contribution from Western Europe to the defense of the West, and the dispute over the establishment of a multilateral nuclear force, the MLS, demanded by the US, provoked recurring concerns about US disengagement in Europe and disputes over the role of Western European countries in NATO. In view of these challenges, the dispute between the advocates of close transatlantic ties on the one hand and the defenders of close cooperation with France on the other hand came to a peak in the Federal Republic. In the meantime, de Gaulle argued in favor of an independent role for continental Europe. The over Britain's accession to the EEC became the crystallization point of this conflict. The Élysée Treaty was preceded by France's ultimately failed initiative to create a European political union, the famous Fouché plans. The failure of this project is attributed to the partner countries' criticism of the intergovernmental orientation of the proposal and the lack of inclusion of Great Britain. In this perspective, the Élysée Treaty can be seen as de Gaulle's attempt to transfer the failed project of a European Union of states to the Franco-German level. However, in de Gaulle's view, the importance of the treaty was dramatically relativized when, during the ratification of the treaty, the German Bundestag added the famous preamble emphasizing the great importance of transatlantic ties. Conversely, even before the signing of the Élysée Treaty in January 1963, de Gaulle reaffirmed his plan to build an independent French nuclear force and announced his veto against Britain's accession to the EEC. Despite the many conflicts of interest, particularly with regard to the role and shape of European and transatlantic cooperation, de Gaulle and Adenauer recognized common or at least complementary interests. De Gaulle who right after the Second World War was strongly opposed to the Franco-German understanding and the beginning of European integration, no longer questioned the progress of European integration after his return to power as president of the Fifth French Republic, founded in 1958. Then he was much more interested in shaping the European community according to his own ideas. For his efforts to assume a political leadership role in the European community, the economically strengthened Federal Republic, which had a political status minus due to the limited sovereignty of the post-war statute, was a welcome partner. The balancing of interests between the political leadership role of France and the economic leadership role of the Federal Republic, which often has been paraphrased with the bomb nuclear bomb versus German Mark, was a fundamental element of Franco-German cooperation until the end of the post-war order. For Adenauer, de Gaulle became the central partner in implementing the policy of westward bound that he had already pursued since the beginning of his chancellorship. As a Catholic who had grown up in the Rhineland, Adenauer had a pronounced Francophile attitude. Already in March 1950, he mentioned the idea of a political and economic union between the two countries. For Adenauer, the reconciliation and cooperation with France was a central prerequisite for the reconstruction of Western Europe and the integration of the Federal Republic in the Western Bloc. Shortly before the end of his term of office, also in 1963, Adenauer wanted to secure the close relationship with France against the increasing domestic opposition from the advocates of a close transatlantic bond by concluding the Élysée Treaty. However, this project could not succeed without anchoring the reconciliation process in civil society. This brings me to the socio-cultural context. First and foremost, after the shock of the two world wars, the longing for peace and reconciliation was widespread in the European countries and increasingly linked to the confrontation with history, the acknowledgement of guilt, and the willingness to overcome hostilities. Furthermore, the activities of de Gaulle and Adenauer had been preceded by diverse efforts towards reconciliation and cooperation between the two countries, not only at a political level, but also in civil society. In the French occupation zone in southwest of Germany, numerous civil society forces were active already in the late 40s and 50s, working for reconciliation and exchange. Between French and Germans for deepening knowledge and understanding of the cultural, social, economic, and political developments of the other country, for learning the language of the neighboring country, and for meeting of children and young people. Many of them have been involved in efforts to foster bilateral understanding and cooperation and at various levels later in their lives. Now I will come to the charisma. Finally, the charisma, assertiveness, and impact of the leaders of that area should be noted. Adenauer and de Gaulle established a cult of Franco-German political couples whose joint work is always carefully observed and analyzed. However, not all of them are equally closely connected and successful. Adenauer and de Gaulle benefited from the great recognition they enjoyed among large parts of the population, despite domestic political opposition. De Gaulle, who played an important role in the French resistance during the Second World War and in the Algerian crisis, enjoyed great recognition as a liberator and savior of France. As president of the Fifth Republic, which was founded according to his ideas, he also had far-reaching scope for action, particularly in foreign policy. In addition, de Gaulle used the state-controlled media of the time as an important instrument for exercising power. Adenauer, the former Lord Mayor of Cologne, who was once again entrusted with this role by the Americans in 1945 and was elected the first Chancellor of the newly founded Federal Republic of Germany in 1949, left his mark on the early Federal Republic like no other politician, according to historians. He enjoyed a high level of recognition among the population, and his policy of reconciliation with France met great approval. Finally, Adenauer also had relatively broad scope of action due to his leadership of the Federal German Foreign Ministry between 1951 and 1955, and on the basis of the German Chancellor's authority to issue directives, which was laid down in the Constitution and which he was happy to use. To conclude, it can be said that Adenauer and de Gaulle, two statesmen committed to political realism, recognized the signs of the times in face of the emerging turning point in the conflict between the superpowers at the beginning of the 1960s. They took a leading role and dynamically advanced the already initiated process of reconciliation and cooperation. They established a symbolism of reconciliation and friendship that is still used politically today. With the Élysée Treaty, they created the institutional foundations for further anchoring, the reconciliation of civil societies, and for the continuous exchange of political actors. On the other hand, the role of both statesmen should not be overestimated. Without a path of reconciliation and cooperation within the European framework, already been initiated in the 50s, and at least against de Gaulle's will, and without the widespread longing for peace and reconciliation in European societies at the time, the success of the two statesmen would have been limited. Finally, it should be borne in mind that it was very specific conditions that made Franco-German reconciliation possible, and that to this day, especially after the end of the post-war order and the enlargement of the European Union, much effort is required to maintain the balance of interests and the special relationship between the two countries. The various elements of Franco-German cooperation can perhaps provide some inspiration for bilateral cooperation between other countries, but they cannot be directly transferred. The historical backgrounds and causes of conflict, as well as the political, socio-economic, and socio-cultural framework conditions for cooperation between the various conflict parties worldwide, are too different. Nevertheless, some determining factors for successful leadership in the process of interstate reconciliation can carefully be derived from the activities of de Gaulle and Adenauer. The first prerequisite is the identification of a common or at least complementary interests in the context of the political framework and conflict situations. Secondly, leadership in interstate reconciliation can only succeed if it is anchored in the collective consciousness. Coming to terms with history, recognizing guilt, willingness to reconcile, and an interest in an open-minded exchange with a former enemy are key prerequisites of understanding. And finally, charisma, or at least a high level of recognition and support for the political actors among the population. A minimum degree of decision power and autonomy of action, as well as close coordination and mutual confidence between the political actors, are important prerequisites for successful political leadership in the process of interstate reconciliation. It remains to be seen whether these requirements can be met in the diversity of current international and regional conflict situations in a disintegrating international order and under the complex conditions of political action in modern societies, which are increasingly torn apart by particular interests and in which the structures of and processes of political opinion forming are becoming more and more opaque with the diversity, mass, and uncontrollability of communication tools. Perhaps it is no coincidence that after de Gaulle and Adenauer, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing and Helmut Schmidt, as well as François Mitterrand and Helmut Kohl, until today, no successful leadership couple can be identified, neither with regard to the deepening of cooperation between the two states, nor with regard to joint leadership within the European Union. With this little caricatures, I thank you for your attention. You can see it, and on the left side you have Adenauer saying, "Listen to me, gentlemen." And there you have the pictures of Khrushchev, Adenauer, Macmillan, and Kennedy, and plan of Europe, France, very small Europe, Soviet Union, and Great Britain already as USA. In the middle, you have 6 years of French-German friendship. It's Macron and Scholz, the current Chancellor of the Federal Republic. And on the right side, you have a picture of de Gaulle and Adenauer saying, and with the title, "In a Safe Harbor," and Adenauer, de Gaulle saying, "But yes, Konrad, I know only one Germany, your Germany." Thank you very much for your attention.
Good morning. Congratulations for the new center. And thank you, Max, and thank you, Dmitry, for inviting me. So we continue with Adenauer, but now with another great leader, great statement, David Ben-Gurion, but still with Adenauer. So in this first slide shows the famous historical meeting between the Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion and the West German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer on March 14, 1960. During this meeting, the Chancellor agreed to secretly provide weapons free of charge and a significant development loan to Israel. Part of it was allocated for the construction of the Dimona nuclear reactor. The meeting was a symbolic culmination with the practical consequences of a policy of rapprochement between the two leaders, led with extraordinary determination. The rapprochement during the era of these two nation builders was the beginning of a long and sometimes twisted road towards reconciliation between the country of the perpetrators and the country of the victims, and generally speaking, between Germans and Jews. I would claim that the rapprochement reflected a deep understanding of the two leaders and their associates about its essential benefit to the strategic aims of their countries. Without negating the moral ground for the reparations agreement and the economic and the military assistance for Israel, it is undoubtedly that considerations of realpolitik, the international stand of West Germany, played a crucial role in Adenauer's Israel policy. Political quid pro quo was central to the diplomatic rapprochement between West Germany and Israel. For the Germans, particularly Adenauer, ties with Israel were seen as a significant element in the reconciliation between Germans and Jews, a critical factor in shaping the image of Germany in the view of her new democratic allies as a new democratic state completely detached from the Nazi legacy, particularly because of her much criticized reluctance to confront the Nazi past genuinely. Throughout the 50s, Adenauer and his associates were concerned that the efforts to mitigate the inter-bloc conflict would lead Washington to make concessions that harmed Germany. Thus, they attached great importance to their image in the American public opinion. For her side, Israel valued the growing diplomatic influence of West Germany as one of the pillars of the West. In the late 50s and early 60s, Israel sought Bonn's help to join the EEC. Moreover, at the beginning of 1957, given the unofficial support of West Germany leaders for Israeli military operation in Sinai Desert in October 1956, Ben-Gurion came with the bold idea that West Germany could become an arms supplier to Israel and even a strategic ally. Between 1958 to 1960, close ties began to evolve between the Israeli and the Federal Republic of Germany defense establishments, eventually leading to March 1960 agreement between Ben-Gurion and Adenauer. In the peculiar story of the relationship between the perpetrators and the victims' countries, So in the peculiar story of the relationship between the perpetrators and the victims' countries, Germany and Israel, I would suggest analyzing the interrelationship between three terms: reconciliation, politics of memory, and diplomacy and memory. So let us begin with reconciliation. The main question regarding reconciliation is a prerequisite to start the long process. How do we create initial trust? Does it require only acknowledging past crimes and accepting official state responsibility? Or does it require profound accountability, genuine reckoning with the past, repentance, and apology? In his address about Germans and Jews at the conference of the World Jewish Congress in 1966, the eminent scholar Gershom Scholem insisted that a serious and genuine clarification of the relations between Germans and Jews was required. The State of Israel and the Federal Republic move in a different path. The fact that Germany erected in the 50s, during Adenauer's era, a wall of silence around the Nazi past, refrained from bringing Nazi criminals to justice, and integrated numerous ex-Nazis in its administration, even in the highest positions, did not hinder the progress of the bilateral relations between Israel and Germany. Instead, practical considerations of economic, diplomacy, and security dictated the pace of progress in the contact between the two governments. This approach was already present in Adenauer's statement in the Bundestag in September 1951, delivered to satisfy Israel preconditions for starting the negotiations over the reparations agreement. Israel did not come out against the chancellor's refusal to acknowledge the Germans' guilt or even acknowledge direct responsibility. So you can see that the word he used was "im Namen des deutschen Volkes." So in the name, the Nazis did it in the name of the Germans. Not the Germans did it, but the Nazis did it in the name of the German people. So he didn't acknowledge a direct responsibility of the Germans, although he perfectly knew that the Israeli and the Jewish leader expected him to make these statements. And you can see here that when the president of Germany, Johannes Rau, the Knesset came 2000, he said something completely different. He said, he asked for forgiveness for what the Germans have done for myself and my generation and so on and so forth. So this is a completely different concept. So although he knew, and we know the drafts that were between the two governments, he refused to do it. He also did not offer any apology in the name of the German people. Moreover, he presented a narrative far from reality that no German leader would have repeated it today, claiming that the majority of the German population had been sickened by the Nazis' action and tried to help the Jews. So the idea is that most of the Germans helped the Jews and only a tiny group of Nazis were part of the Holocaust. So the next term that I would like to relate to is the politics of memory. It refers to the efforts of the establishment to shape the picture of the past and to deal with it per contemporary needs, thus forming historical consciousness and educational lessons. I would argue that the politics of memory of the Holocaust and the Nazi era, both in Israel and in West Germany, considerably affected the bilateral rapprochement policy of the two leaders. In Germany, the relationship to the past was determined by the desire to integrate all segments of the nation in constructing a Western-like democracy, including those who had made only a mistake, so to speak, and supported Hitler. Thus, Adenauer accepted, as we saw, he was ready to accept responsibility, a political responsibility, not a direct responsibility of the German people, an indirect responsibility for the unspeakable crimes. Still, he emphasized that they had been committed by only a small segment of the German people. And I quote, the German criminals who took over Germany. It was a convenient myth adopted by many Germans who knew better as an essential element for consolidating the West German democracy. Adenauer was willing to pay a lot for Ben-Gurion's statement that Adenauer Germany was indeed the other Germany, completely detached from Hitler's Germany. From the perspective of Israel leaders, and this is the politics of memory of the Israel establishment, the main lesson in Ben-Gurion's eyes, the main lesson of the Holocaust was the imperative need to establish and strengthen the state of Israel as an answer to the helplessness of the Jewish history, of Jews in history, which they perceived as the core of Holocaust memory. To achieve this, Israel needed West Germany help, money, and advanced weapons free of charge. This is Ben-Gurion's speech in the Knesset in 1959. It is my profound conviction that the injunction of the martyrs of the Holocaust is rebuilding. This is the lesson of the Holocaust. The lesson of the Holocaust is rebuilding and strengthening, advancing, and ensuring the security of Israel. For that purpose, we need friends. Friends are the Germans, who are able and willing to equip the Israel Defense Force to guarantee our survival. Because now the Nazis are the Arabs. They are the new Nazis. But if we regard Germany or any other country as a Satan, we shall not receive arms. So this is his speech in the Knesset. The third term that helps to analyze the rapprochement process between Israel and the Federal Republic is diplomacy and memory. It relates to the use or the misuse of memory to achieve diplomatic objectives. Israel could use Holocaust memory as a political tool thanks to the West Germany's attempt to provide support for a Jewish state as a way to moderate West Germany, the criticism on West Germany on her wall of silence it had erected around its Nazi past. However, it is interesting that among the Israeli policy makers, there was a difference, a way, how to use the memory as a political tool. One approach was that to put pressure on the Germans, that pressure should be exerted on the Germans by emphasizing Germany's moral debt to Israel, to the Jewish people, and to the state of Israel. The second strategy, which I defined in my study as the indirect approach, was followed primarily by Ben-Gurion. It meant a careful use of memory while refraining from direct reference to Germany's moral debt. Instead, Ben-Gurion suggested using a positive incentive to encourage the German side to increase its sense of historical obligation to the Jewish state and forge a link between its historical consciousness and the support and the strengthening of Israel economically and militarily. In their meeting in New York, Ben-Gurion invited the chancellor, and I quote, to participate. I invite you, the chancellor, to participate in developing our country. Be our partner. That's what he told him. Be our partner. The chancellor promised to help. He told Ben-Gurion that we would not leave you alone out of moral reasons and out of practical politics. Israel, he said, the chancellor, is the fortress of the West. He added that he wanted to thank Ben-Gurion. I want to thank you, he said, for not identifying the German people today with Hitler and what he did. So, to sum up, in September 1952, Israel's leaders expected Adenauer to acknowledge collective guilt and to apologize. The chancellor refused. It contradicted its policy towards the past, the Vergangenheitspolitik. On the other hand, he admitted past atrocities and offered compensation for both global and individual. As Jennifer Lind pointed out in her book, Sorry States, admitting past atrocities and avoiding denial, even when apology is not offered, are probably the most significant starting point in the path of rapprochement and the long road towards reconciliation. More than 6 decades have passed since the historic meeting between Ben-Gurion and Adenauer. Israel and Germany became very close allies. During the years, however, their relations suffered numerous diplomatic crises. The connection and occasionally the contradiction between Holocaust memory on the one hand and German interests and her global perspective on the other, and the definition of special relationship against normal relationship between the countries have been at the center of the relations between the two countries. Lately, the issue rose again forcefully following the definition of Israel security by Chancellor Scholz as Germany's raison d'etat, Staatsräson, a phrase which Angela Merkel used already in 2008. Extreme opponents of Israel, mainly from the extreme anti-Zionist left in Germany, called to free Palestine from the German guilt.
Very much, Roni, for this very interesting presentation. And I think we're just going on with Lior, and afterwards we're having our discussion. I think it's just the better way to not interrupt the whole thing. So, Dmitry, could you please open?
Yeah, just a second. I'm trying to find it.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you. It's great to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. Congratulations for the new center. This panel is focusing more on the role of the leaders. And we are hearing today about remarkable leaders and great leaders that play the role. And in my research and also in my courses, I'm dealing with different conflict zones. And it's clear that you can talk about some of the most well-known peace processes without talking about the importance of the leaders. You can't understand Israel-Egypt peacemaking without talking about Anwar Sadat, without talking about Begin. Of course, South Africa breakthrough without talking about Nelson Mandela and the cloud. And also Northern Ireland, I know that you'll talk in the next panel, without talking about Jerry Adams or John Hume and others. But as we know, in many conflicts, in many stages, this is not the case. We don't have this kind of leadership. We have a different condition. So that's why in some cases, we need a different type of leaders or different types of actors. And actually, in my presentation, I will talk about my research about the unofficial actors in conflict resolution and what I call in my book, the private peace entrepreneurs, the private peacemakers. And when we are looking on the history of different conflict zones, different regions, different stages, we can see that these kind of actors that I will define in a minute actually played a critical role in different conflict resolution processes. But actually, many of them were excluded from the history textbook, and usually they didn't receive the attention they deserve in the literature that is focusing on, of course, the official leaders, the official channels, the official diplomacy. So I will try a little bit to shed light on these actors, and I will start maybe with the definition. Okay, so the private peace entrepreneurs, as I define it, actually based on 4 elements. First of all, I'm talking about private citizen with no official authority whatsoever to outline, to conduct foreign policy, to negotiate with the other side. Nobody nominated them, nobody elected them, what we call self-appointed diplomat. And second, they belong to the disputing side. So I'm talking about actors from the conflict, not external actors coming to interfere. They're actually part of the conflict. And they create channels of communication with officials from the other side of the conflict. And the goal is to promote a process of conflict resolution, peacemaking, and reconciliation. And of course, this can be done in different stages. It can be done in the pre-negotiation stage, during negotiation, or conflict transformation, or reconciliation. So, and this is, of course, connected to a very interesting development in the theoretical literature. I will very briefly on that. But just to say that we can see, especially since the end of the Cold War, that more and more scholars are writing about the changes in the diplomatic landscape, the emergence of new actors, that we have the private diplomats, unofficial diplomats, citizen diplomats, claiming that the official diplomat no longer have the monopoly that they used to have for many years. And at the same time, of course, it's also relevant to the track 2 diplomacy that's referring to a wide spectrum of meetings, activities between private citizens in different sides of the conflict, trying to assist the track 1, and this is the official track 1 diplomacy. And it's actually also related to a, I think, fascinating trend that we can see in the peace building literature in recent years, that this is what we call the local term. To focus more on the role of the local peace building, local peacemakers, not just the international actors, the external actors, the international institution, but also about the potential role of the local actors in the conflict zone and how they contribute. And this is, of course, very relevant for our research. Okay, so of course, one of the biggest maybe puzzles that I had in my research dealing with these actors is the question of their authority and their power resources. Because eventually we are talking about private citizens. They don't have the official authority, the political, economic, military resources that states have or international organizations have. So the question is, what are their alternative unofficial resources that eventually enable them to try to make an influence and to try to make an impact on conflict resolution? So in my research, I identified a few important types of resources. I will just mention some of them and also use some case study. So the first one is resources of knowledge and expertise. And here, the fact that they have this ongoing dialogue with officials from the other side for many years. In some of the cases I'm talking about, it's actually decades. It can provide them with very unique and important resources of knowledge and expertise that sometimes can be even better than the official resources and the official actors that don't have this knowledge, especially when you don't have official relation between the parties that even don't recognize one another. So they are maybe sometimes the only one that actually are talking with the other side. Just to mention one case that I mentioned in my book, Susan Massey, you can see in the picture an American writer, and she was an expert on Russian history, Russian culture, and she visited Russia frequently. She had a lot of networks. I'm not talking about the 80s, including a close connection to people that were close to Gorbachev officials. And at some point, the Reagan administration, again, peak moment, of course, in the Cold War, started to consult with her, and she had an influence on trying to change the perception of Reagan about the Soviet Union, and also to use her to exchange messages between the Soviet Union and the US, of course, between Reagan and Gorbachev. And it was mainly, an important part of it was her knowledge and expertise working on this issue for many years. Another type is resources of access and context that these kind of actors have on both sides of the conflict to decision makers or to power circles. And this can actually give them some kind of a unique position, that there are access and contacts on both sides to leaders on both sides. And that can be very helpful in order to try to promote some kind of conflict resolution or peacemaking. And we are talking a lot about Germany. So this is another historical case of Albert Berlin, a German businessman, Jewish, that actually was on the one hand, because of his very successful businesses, was very close to the German Kaiser, Wilhelm, but at the same time, he had also very good contact in London with the British decision makers. So during the years before the First World War, he was very concerned with the growing tension between the countries, the naval arms race. So he actually tried to use the fact that he had contacts on both sides in Berlin and in London to try to bring the parties together to negotiate how to end the naval arms race and to try to improve the relation. And at some point, he even succeeded to bring the parties to negotiate, but of course it failed and he couldn't prevent the war. But this was actually a remarkable effort. Thanks. And another type is resources of what we could call moral and spiritual authority that these kind of actors have that can be very useful. We can distinguish between what we can call intellectual authority, and I'm talking in my book about different academic private peace entrepreneurs. One of them is from South Africa, Professor Willie Asterhaus, that was engaged during the late 80s in an unofficial dialogue with leaders from the ANC, the African National Congress, especially Thabo Mbeki. And at the same time, he was reporting officials in the government, officials in the establishment, talking about different ideas, talking about different models, how to move to democracy and peace in South Africa. And again, the status that he has as an intellectual authority that is connected to the academic, not to politics, actually really helped him to get influence on the official establishment and to try to bridge between the parties, leading eventually to official negotiation with the ANC. And we are talking a lot, of course, about the religious authority and the fact that they can use religious resources, they can use their reputation. And I mentioned in the book a lot of cases of religious private peace entrepreneurs, leaders. One of them is from Mozambique, Archbishop Jaime Gonzalez, that actually as a religious leader was able to gain trust from both parties, Renamo and the government and the Renamo organization, in the conflict in Mozambique, the beginning of the 90s, leading to the peace agreement in 92 and helping them to negotiate and to mediate during this negotiation. And just another type, we can mention that it's what we can call tactical power resource and instrumental power resources. The fact that they are private citizens can actually sometimes can give them some kind of advantages. They can be much more flexible and informal, and they can go from one place to another without the media knowledge, without the public knowledge. And they have a lot, different from the official that have a lot of limitation or official diplomat, they can actually have the power of deniability. That they can say to the leaders, I will do my kind of activities and effort, and you have, if it will leak, if it will fail, you can always distance yourself. You can say, I have nothing to do with it, it's all with private citizen. If it will work, you can always use it as an official tool. And this is, of course, something that is different from official diplomats, that you can do it with these kind of actors. And maybe just for conclusion, I will say that these kind of actors I found can actually be active and can contribute in different conflicts and actually in different stages, as I said. And I identify different kinds of how they can also have influence and impact on conflict resolution and contribution. So I can say that, for example, in some of the cases, they played as private local mediators between the parties. A very interesting case also in one of my case studies in my book is Brendan Daddy. You can see the picture from London, from London Derry, from Northern Ireland. And he was actually a secret back channel between the British government and the IRA for 20 years. Nobody knew about it. Also, people in his family I interviewed had no idea about it. Only later on, after the peace agreement, it was revealed. And he actually played a role in trying to create trust between the parties, especially at the beginning of the 90s before the official peace process. So he was doing the stages, the pre-negotiation stage. But also they can have an influence on the public opinion in trying to change the perception, trying to change what we call the enemy image. And another case I'm talking about in my book is Uri Avneri, an Israeli journalist that actually was starting to engage in dialogue with the PLO during the 70s, during the 80s, when it was completely a taboo. It even was against the law at some point. And he was also the editor of a newspaper that was very popular, Olam Hazeh. So he actually used this newspaper in order to report about this meeting, in order to try to change the public opinion, to change perception about the PLO. And you can see here also an example, but there are also other types of how they can influence. Sometimes they can promote some kind of crisis management. They can bring different ideas and models that can later move to the official sphere. And I would just say at the same time that there are, of course, a lot of problems and challenges with these kind of activities, these kind of actors, and a lot of criticism that we can hear against them. Maybe just to mention some of the main arguments that usually we'll hear, that first of all, they are unprofessional amateurs, they don't have the tools, they don't have the training to deal with such a sensitive issues of war and peace. There is the argument that they're undermining the ability of a government to conduct a unified policy. If the government is saying we will not talk with X, these private citizens go behind their back and doing it. And they also don't have legitimacy and do not represent anyone. They're just private citizens. So I would just say that also part of my research was the discussion on this argument. And I interviewed many cases of private peace entrepreneurs. Some of the counter argument that I heard from them was that they are not trying to pretend that they are officials. Everybody knows that they are private citizens. Everybody knows that they are private actors. They are just trying to fill the diplomatic vacuum and to try to contribute. And actually, government can use that in different stages. And it's not just their right, it's also their duty as citizens living in this conflict to try to do whatever they can. And also talking about that they don't have the tools, they claim that sometimes, as I mentioned, they have other advantages and other information and other tools that maybe can be even better than the official diplomat, and that can be very useful. And just the last point, I will say that that it's important, of course, to distinguish between different cases. Some of them in some cases it can work, some cases it can fail. It failed, but of course, eventually I found that in many conflicts, I'm talking about Israel-Palestine, Northern Ireland, South Africa, Vietnam War, I found that these actors played as what I call the diplomatic avant-garde. They created the first step, the first contact with the other side, and actually paving the way later on for officials to move, to get inside and to start official process. But they were the one who created the first step when it was still ongoing conflict and the political parties were not ready yet to do it.
So, Lior, I wanted to ask you if you dealt with the case of Nahum Goldman, because Nahum Goldman, in the case of Israel-Germany relations, and later on, it is the initiative with Egypt, is played and it's a fascinating example. He held an official position as the head of the World Jewish Congress, but still he was sent by Israel, or he sent himself conversations and meeting with Adenauer to advance the relations between Israel and Germany. And sometimes when the Israel used him, and when Ben-Gurion didn't like what he did, he said, well, you are a private citizen. I didn't allow you to do it. But from time to time, he used him. When he was convinced to him, it was good to use him, and then there was, of course, a real scandal between the relations between him and Golda Meir, and this is a fascinating example.
Yeah, I would just say that usually in the longer presentation here, I use a cartoon that is actually exactly Goldman and Golda.
Okay.
When she's saying, I have my own phone, I don't need your phone, I don't need that you will call because I have my own official channels. But this is fascinating case because he's moving from some kind of official, not official, but both they're working as part of the Zionist project at some stages. And then you have this clash between the official Israeli government, especially the Golda Meir, that's what the point.
When they don't like what you do,
exactly. And she also
you're
said,
a private citizen.
she said in the Knesset, you are not here, you need to come here to see our life here, and then you can try to interfere. And there was a serious clash between them. He also met with Arafat and also went to Morocco, and he had Joe Golan that was doing his work with the Arab countries.
When Ben-Gurion didn't like what he did, so he said, you are the wandering Jew.
It was the case, by the way, also with Magnus. It also did whatever he wanted, and Ben-Gurion didn't like it.
So I would maybe also ask 2 or 3 questions, and then we would open for everybody. Yeah. Okay. So we can just share the microphone, and I will. Can you just open the? Thank you. Okay. So interesting that you mentioned Nahum Goldman, because I wanted to ask you, Roni, also something very similar to this. You said that the role of you as public opinion was very important. I read some books regarding my PhD thesis that actually said that it was just an overestimation of US influence, and that actually the US focused way more on the Cold War and to have a strong West Germany, and not so much that the actual US public was that interested in what Germany did. So also here we see Nahum Goldman, how he tried to do the first steps towards Germany, and that Adenauer promised him in the hand to pay reparations without even consulting his finance minister. So there, maybe we also have this point of different times back then. He haven't had a foreign minister. He just did decisions on his own, and then sometimes he needs to stick to them, even though he wouldn't like to want to. So, however, what I wanted to ask is how you see this this role of public opinion in the US and generally of the allies to form the German-Israeli coalition, or whether it was also some kind of misconception from the part of Germany in the beginning to not have the possibility to go back. And the second thing, you just already mentioned the differences between an apology and acknowledgement, and the levels of acknowledgement, and that an apology is not always an apology. And yeah, also here it is maybe interesting to think about the gradual acceptance of acknowledgement, and that at one point it maybe there is no way back. As soon as you have acknowledged that there was something, and more information are coming at light, for instance, through the
beginning of the process.
Yeah.
So first of all, United States and the administration, they played a crucial role in the relations between Israel and Germany, West Germany, at the beginning, mainly regarding the reparations. They put a lot of pressure on Adenauer to make this deal with Israel. You know that during the negotiations in Wassenaar, there were a lot of problems between them. The Germans didn't want to pay what they promised, and both the Americans and the British put a lot of pressure on them because they knew that it's very important for the future of Germany to accept Germany. And this is the beginning of the Cold War. They thought about NATO. They thought about what is going to be the role of Germany in NATO. So they wanted, make this peace between Germans and Jews. It's very important. Was very important to the American. Now it's true that Adenauer exaggerated the influence of the American public opinion on the world situation, on the relations between, or the role of Germany. But you need to take into consideration, and this is what the Israeli diplomats understood. They understood the power that they have. because they understood that the Germans have this perception that everyone in the world hates them. They were right about the Europeans. Europeans really hated the Germans because of the war. I mean, there is a very famous story that the president of Germany came to visit London, and the British public was very much against him, and they didn't show up. And everyone, the Germans wrote it it was in the German papers. An Israeli journalist even wrote, "See the British, how brave they are, as against what we are buying everything that the Germans are selling us. Volkswagen and so on and so forth." So he was angry about it. But they exaggerated because and also Adenauer attributed a lot of, and this is also an exaggeration, a lot of power to the Jewish influence in the United States. This was one of the main reasons why Adenauers were looking for an agreement with Israel, not so much because of Israel, but what he perceived as a Jewish power in the United States and how the Jews can influence the administration. It's funny, because if you look back for the Holocaust, you can see that the Jews didn't have any power. But this was in the mind of the Germans that they have this power, and that's why it's so important for him to influence the American public opinion, to influence the Jews. And we know that whenever Adenauer thought to go to visit Washington, before his visit, he made a statement, a pro-Jewish statement, whenever he went to visit Washington. So this was the policy.
Yeah, I think it's a very common anti-Semitic narrative that the Jews are ruling the world, and yeah, it didn't change a lot since then. I had another question that I wrote down regarding private peace entrepreneurs, and there is this concept of symbolic politics trap, where you have leaders that are stuck in their own narrative, and that at one point, like maybe even Arafat, he couldn't go back to say, yeah, these enemies we have, maybe they're not so bad eventually. And so maybe I thought that also here we have these private peacemakers that can go between the lines, that can maybe also, like, easier shift from one side to the other, that are not that stuck in an official narrative that they propose to the public over and over and over again. So yeah, I wanted to ask whether this is like one kind of strategy to create common ground between narratives as a non-official person.
So yeah, I think when we are talking about the official leaders comparing to the private actors, the official leaders, of course, have the public opinion. We are talking about the two-level game. They always need to think about their own public opinion, their own political incentive and consideration. And we know that in many cases, leaders have political incentive not to do this kind of things. We talked about public opposition to different processes. We have a leader that was murdered not far away from here because peacemaking process. We know there are a lot of political incentive not to do that. So what these private actors can do is actually to try to bridge between the current situation that you still have the enemy image, the ethos of conflict, and all of this public perception, until there will be a political rightness, and to try to work in between, and to try to go to the leaders and to say, this is a report that I received from the other side, that it's actually, there are changes there. And I can say that I talked about Uri Avneri. So when Rabin was prime minister in the 70s, his first term, he was against talking with the PLO at that point, of course. But when Avneri approached him, he said, please give me this report. I was always happy to hear that. Some leaders were, of course, against it. At some point, even people like Abinatan went to jail just because of that. But there are some leaders, also, by the way, Kennedy was like this, and others that always use these kind of private actors to say, the official diplomacy, we are not going to do it because it's too provocative, it's too sensitive. But it's nice that you have these private actors doing this work. If they will see, if I will get new messages, new information, maybe I can then move to the official track.
Maybe not long enough, but maybe you can just speak up. No, you don't need to stand up. Just
yeah, I have two questions. Professor Roni Stauber and to Sabine earlier. One is, what is your explanation in terms of Adenauer position, personality, that he objected so much to the apology, to taking responsibility, and what is the larger frame of this policies of the head?
So the answer is that it wasn't so much Adenauer that he wasn't ready to apologize, but he spoke in the name of the Germans, and he knew that the Germans are so much against it. You know that when the opinion polls in Germany after the reparation agreements showed that most of the Germans in West Germany were against paying the Jews money, and they were dealing with their own sufferings, what the Allies did to us and what the Soviets did to us. So he knew that the public opinion is very much against, and he told in a very famous meeting with Charette wanted when they signed the reparation agreement in Luxembourg, Charette came with a statement which he wanted to make. And after Adenauer read it, he said, "We are not going to say we're not going to tell it because this is something that I can hear, but the German won't be able to hear it. They don't want to hear it." And so this is one thing. The second is, as I explained, Adenauer was a nation builder, like Ben-Gurion. He wanted to integrate all parts of the German society. And there were a lot of Nazis. And many of the Germans supported Hitler. Most of the Germans supported, it was a myth. Most of the Germans supported Hitler. But he wanted, to build a nation. So he knew that he need all those Germans who supported Hitler, and they want now to give that it will be a beginning, a new beginning. So Stunde Null, what they call it. Now it's a new beginning in Germany. So let us forget. So on the one hand, he was ready to pay and support Israel, but the condition was for Israel, let us forget the past. Let us all only think about the present and the future. We know we took responsibility. We did take responsibility. We didn't deny the Holocaust, and this is the beginning. But let us concentrate on the present and the future. And in this, he found an ally, Ben-Gurion, who also was a very constructive a leader who thought about the present. He said, Ben-Gurion said, I'm not dealing with the past. I'm dealing what is happening today. I'm using the past. This is the policy of using the past from our benefit, for the benefit of the state of Israel.
Thank you. And I have a question to Sabine. Yeah, you are listening?
No, I'm here. I have some difficulties with the screen here because I see always a list of presentations and the conference is very small. So I have to excuse, and I have not very good understood the question. But I would like to say that politics of memory started. Oh, yes, now it's nice. Thank you very much. Politics of memory in the Federal Republic. I think it started only during the 60s, and until then we had much more difficulties with this. And in difference, perhaps, to the situation of Adenauer and Ben-Gurion, with Adenauer and
I'm using the phrase Vergangenheitspolitik, which Professor Frey used, in order to characterize the situation in Germany. The attitude of the German establishment to how to integrate the society using the past or ignoring the past.
Yes. Excuse me.
Can I ask a question?
No,
I think you can ask a question.
Yeah.
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 You know, in the presentation, you did not say anything about the context of the relationship, because yes, you know, 200 or more years of rivalry that ended with absolute victory of the allies. And this is the situation. So we have to build relation from a destruction of one side, complete destruction and giving up. It was not ceasefire, you know, just complete capitulation of Germany. And from this, it started the reconciliation, so-called. So first, how does this complete victory influence, and what were the steps before the goal that laid the background for the goal?
There have been, excuse me, there have been lots of steps before, because the reconciliation started already in the 50s, and there was a beginning of European integration with the Monet Memorandum and the founding of the European Community for Coal and Steel, and that was the beginning. And it was the French side coming to Adenauer to say, now we have to work together to create Europe, and for creating Europe, we need reconciliation of France and Germany. And Adenauer himself, he was very open to this process, because he already, from the beginning of his political action, he was for a strong relationship between France and Germany, and he was not so much interested, and that was opposed within German politics. He was not so much interested in the German unity, and so he was not very opposite to the division of Germany, and it was a chance for him to create this relationship to France. And there were many people, also scientists, and also men of France and Germany, and especially in France, it was Joseph Rovin, it was the Père Ribot, and they founded structures of reconciliation within the society to work together. And for Adenauer and de Gaulle later on, it was not so difficult, because there was already a basis for reconciliation. So the steps of reconciliation of France and Germany they started already in the 15, long before the activities of Adenauer and de Gaulle. That's because that I said that we have not to overestimate the role of these two statesmen.
Can I have a question to Lior. In your study, did you question the driving forces?
Just a little louder.
In which
Okay.
study?
Yeah, in the no, Sabine, I'm asking the question to Lior. Is in your study, did you study in your study the driving forces behind what were the driving forces behind these concrete men or women who we saw on the screen? And looking for the future, do you expect the emergence of emergence of similar personalities in the new future concerning different conflicts?
Yeah, so I must say that when I was working on all of these cases, and really eventually I created a data of something like 40 cases, I started from this conflict and moved into different conflicts, as I mentioned. It's always a question of what pushing these individuals, because some of them really devoted 20, 30, Brendan Daly that I mentioned, like almost 30 years of his life was devoted to this issue. Uri Avneri, 30. So some of these people and they failed and failed and failed in many of the cases. They have some success, but in many. So it's clear that part of it is also the question of motivation. So I'm not dealing with psychology. I've never tried, I don't have the ability maybe to deal with that, but I try to identify some elements that you can find in all of them. I found, first of all, the question of optimism was really, really strong in all of them. You can see that even in the worst situation and conflict and war, there was still truly believe that first, that it can be changed, that conflict can be resolved, and second, that they can help, that they can contribute. Most of the people that think living in conflict think that this is like earthquake, there's nothing we can do. They believe it can be changed and that they can do, and they have a lot of like sense of mission from different reasons, for different, some of them religious, some of them secular, some of them more believe that they are global citizens, some of them more nationalists, but all of them have this sense of mission that they need to do it. And they also have they don't have trust in the official establishment. They don't believe that their government can do that, or they don't want, or they can. And also they have a different relation with the other side, mainly from young age. I found that in most of the cases, since from being young, they already met the other side. So they don't have what enemy image and what we call the perception of the other side. Brendan Daddy was from a mixed neighborhood, for example. Uri Avner was working with Arabs already, he was starting very young. So all of these people have already a different perception from these people, right?
Independent move.
Yeah, and they're also very individual, by the way. It's also very work with them. It's a very people that they want to do it. They believe that they have the wall. It's also something that it's difficult for others to work with them.
Do we have any records how they dealt with the situation? What did they say? Did any of these people write books or recollected? What did they say when they had the other party in front of them? I mean, their methods. Did they describe in any place their methods? What did they use? No.
So I would just say that in general there are different types, as I mentioned, using different strategies. Some of them are actually doing very public activities, like Uri Avner, everything to show. Also, Abi Natan taking a plane and going to Egypt one day in the 60s. And the main goal is to influence the public opinion. And then they are trying to push the other side to make a public gesture, mainly. But sometimes they are actually secret private entrepreneurs, like I mentioned, Bernard Daddy. And then they are working secretly, nobody knows about it. And then the messages to the other side is to try to deliver messages to the other side, to try to convince them to change their policy and to help them to give messages to the official government in their side. I would just say that some of them, as I said, public, and then they also publish a lot of book about their activity, and some of them, many people, that's why I mentioned, they're excluded from the history because we don't know. And also when I'm looking for archives, some of them, when I came to Avner, he said, I don't have an archive. Eventually, he actually created an archive. You can find it today in Jerusalem, but they're not maybe aware that what they're doing also diplomacy. They're just doing what they think they should do.
Did you find out that what are, I mean, the conclusions, the results? Most of them failed, or percentage? How many succeeded? And can you give us? I mean, just for that will be optimistic. Can you give us an example of people who succeeded?
So first of all, I tried not to use the word success in my. So for me, if they have some kind of an impact, that was the main question. If, for example, somebody is using the other side to deliver messages, for me, it means that they had an impact on the official because they moved to the official channels and they are using them. Even the case of Gershon Baskin, for example, that they used as part of the official channel with Hamas about Gilad Shalit that was being captured. And at some point, I talked with David Meidan. He was responsible from the Mossad for the negotiation. At some point, all the official mediators just collapsed. The Egyptian was not there, the German was not there. So he said, I need someone to talk to deliver messages to Hamas. And then Gershon Baskin is there. He had a channel that was working for many years, and then he was able to use it. So I'm not sure if it's success or not, but it had some impact on the official sphere. And then I was looking on different ways how they have it official. It can be by using them to deliver messages, by having influence on the public opinion, by moving ideas. The idea of Hudna, for example, initiative started as an unofficial initiative, moving to the official. Also, by the way, started as two academics that started an unofficial channel, leading eventually to official, but they have very good relation with the official. So we can say that eventually we can see that in many cases, at least they can have an official channel. Maybe they will not turn to be an official diplomat, or the case of Oslo is really one case that really started an unofficial move to official, but in many cases they can have a dramatic influence in different stages, especially by the way in negotiations.
Is it perhaps?
Sabine.
Yes, is it perhaps possible to think about the term of leadership today in modern societies? I think there's a big difference between leadership at the times of Adenauer, de Gaulle, Ben-Gurion, and so on, and today. And so I would ask you, what do you think, what do you think about the term of leadership and also of the term of interstate reconciliation? Because in the modern conflicts, we have different groups in conflict and not only states and groups within the conflicts. And that, I think, so it will be much more difficult today as in after the Second World War.
First of all, I think it's really a question of leadership. It's pity that we don't have now leaders like Ben-Gurion. I can say it as an Israeli citizen. It's really pity. But also, what?
I did not.
But also maybe we can think about the era. I mean, it was the post-war era. And the West was looking, I mean, there was this new conflict with the Soviet Union. They were the enemy now. And they were looking for how to unite the West. So, I mean, Adenauer and de Gaulle, Adenauer and also Adenauer and Ben-Gurion, because Adenauer thought about Israel as a fortress of the West against the Soviet influence in the Middle East. So they have this, I mean, they have this need to go, I mean, to solve problems and to find way for reconciliation between themselves. I mean, they will be able to stand against the new enemy. So I think this is I think one of the main, or probably we should take it as a main motivation for the reconciliation. The need to reconcile, to build the new Europe, to build the new West against the East.
Yeah, but you have motivation, but do you have, or do we have today, the leaders today have also the possibility? That's I think that will be the question, not only the motivation, because the scope of action of the leaders today is much more difficult. And for example, we have actually the current president, Emmanuel Macron in France. He is very engaged concerning Europe, European integration, European cooperation, and Franco-German relationship. And in his first legislature, he has done very much to reinforce German-Franco cooperation. But it was very difficult for him, and in his second lecture, he has no more majority in his parliament, and it is much more difficult. And so we have structures in modern societies which have as consequence that the prerequisites for leadership is much more difficult.
So I think at this point we need to finish the first panel, and I would just say that this is a huge topic, leadership in general and the circumstances of leadership worldwide. And I think we see some strong leaders in the world, but even they are maybe in terms of peacemaking not that powerful that they think. Talking about the Trump peace plan, for instance, I think it would be worthwhile to not think about him as powerless, but whether it was his personal engagement that led to this agreement is questionable. So, but I think this is leading too far, and I want to thank you very much, all of you, and best wishes to Cornelia that couldn't attend, and I hope she's feeling better soon. And thank you. We see each other in a few minutes.